Welcome to Simply by Deal HQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Simply by Deal HQ. My name is Adefere Ademo, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing how digitization and the fourth industrial revolution can address Africa's most pressing developmental challenges, such as infrastructure and energy, deficiency, health, education, and supply chain, and also the capacity of the fourth industrial revolution to transform the continent into a global powerhouse. And we have, for the very first time on Simply, two guests on this episode: Adora Nwodo, a software engineer with the mixed reality department at Microsoft, and Stephen Shinelli, who is a professor of practice specializing in the fourth industrial revolution at the University of Johannesburg. Adora and Stephen, welcome to Simply. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.
As is our custom on Simply, we'll be asking you questions to gain your insight on what the fourth industrial revolution is and what it really means for the African continent. So without further ado, let's begin. My very first question is for Mr. Stephen. For the benefit of those who do not know, what is the fourth industrial revolution? Will it be a disruptive or dramatic improvement on the third industrial revolution, which came with a shift to digital computers and marked the beginning of the information age? Or do you think it's just a mild improvement on that?
Okay, well, let's frame the question first with a historical perspective as to what the earlier industrial revolutions were. If you go back in time, the first industrial revolution, well, let me qualify that. All these really relate to the relationship between labor and non-labor productivity. Labor being human intervention versus non-human intervention. So the first industrial revolution was really the use of, the steam engine back in the 19th century, the cotton gin and so on and so forth, where steam enabled the powering of equipment to facilitate things that man used to do, but now you have some equipment productivity. The second industrial revolution moves into the early 20th century with a concept called Fordism. Fordism, Henry Ford, who produced the first car, his unique contribution, which became the second industrial revolution, is mass production. Is rather than producing one at a time, mass production changed industries. The third revolution rolled forward is really the inclusion of information technology, the internet, digital communications, generally for the individual to correspond with others, but way of digital communication and the internet. The fourth, which we are in, is really the convergence and the confluence of the biological world, the physical world, and the digital world, where communications take place certainly on a massive basis, but then you move into areas of biological design, synthetic biology, the use of technology to enhance biological attributes, next generation materials, some of the categories within the fourth industrial revolution would include artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, where machinery communicates between each other, so you don't need human intervention. Digital ledger technology, or what is more familiarly called blockchain, where you have ledger systems that allow for peer-to-peer transfers, as opposed to having an intermediary which facilitates transfers of information, transfers of capital, and so on and so forth. And then you go, as I mentioned before, synthetic biology, and you start looking at sort of next generations. To your second part of the question, is this really a huge leap forward from the third industrial revolution, or is it an incremental move? I would probably say it's an incremental move. There's many, many more things that can be done. In fact, I'm involved in a pretty significant project to change animal-based materials and substitute, animal-based, whether that's meat for food, leather goods, all being replaced with plant-based, because the technology is there where you can mimic, other types of materials, say animal-based materials with plant-based materials, and so the effect on the climate and so on and so forth is beneficial. So with that, I'll pass the baton rather than my monologue here.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Stephen. That was very enlightening. I think I agree with you very much on that. Adora, that's my next question is for you. What is the metaverse, and how do you think it fits into the fourth industrial revolution?
To talk about the metaverse first, I want to talk about mixed reality, just so that anyone listening in on this conversation that didn't have an idea of any of the things before would make sense out of it. So I'm going to talk about AR and VR. And AR is, being able to include digital graphics into like your physical space. And the most common
AR is
augmented reality.
I'm sorry to cut you short. Yes, okay. I wanted to.
Yes, augmented reality and virtual reality. So augmented reality, puts digital elements into your physical space. And one very common example for that people always use when they're explaining these concepts is Instagram story filters or Snapchat filters. So if you've ever used any of those filters where, like, imagine you are doing Snapchat or Instagram story and then there are bunny ears on your head, or you have glasses on as you're trying to take a cute selfie. Those glasses or those bunny ears don't exist in real life. It's just immersed in that picture or in that video experience. So that's, similarly to how AR experiences are. And VR is 100% immersive. It's a virtual environment where when you put on a headset, you don't know anything currently going on around you. All you can see is all the digital or graphic, things in that computerized environment. And today, a mixed reality experience is like, the complete blend of your physical and your digital worlds, where I'm experiencing my physical world with digital elements in it. I can interact with them as though I am in a VR experience, and I can also see them in my world and acknowledge that those things are immersed like an AR experience. So it's like a fair blend of both, if that makes sense. And today, of which that is also changing today, but currently or before conversations about the metaverse came into play, people experience mixed reality in silos. So I wear my headset, I'm experiencing whatever I'm experiencing, and that's it. Two people wearing the same headsets had no way of communicating and collaborating in an experience, in a virtual experience. And then that was what birthed the metaverse, essentially. So the metaverse is an environment where people can come and communicate / collaborate in, some kind of virtual existence in mixed reality, basically. So the metaverse is that environment where that communication and collaboration happens. It's that virtual environment. It's that mixed reality space where people can come in and, collaborate. So it's not just people experiencing this technology in silos now. It's people experiencing it together. That's what it is at the moment. So the metaverse brings in not only the sense of enhanced technology, but also the sense of community. And about linking the metaverse and the fourth industrial revolution, the metaverse is built on a bunch of enhanced technology. So I know that Mr. Steven was talking a lot about, machines collaborating with each other and less human intervention. And, things like AI. Mixed reality is one of all those cutting edge technologies as well. If you hear people that talk about the metaverse the way they talk about it, there's also always a blockchain side to that. And the blockchain is also new generation technology coming up as well. So these new technologies existing in one product is, I believe, going to be part of that revolution, and it would influence the way we work, play, and interact with computers generally.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So just flowing from this last question, Carl Schwab from the World Economic Forum has stated that the fourth industrial revolution, we have four major elements on businesses, which are customer expectations, product improvement, collaborative innovation, and organizational forms. So how does the metaverse help deliver on these expectations?
Okay, so in terms of customer expectation, product improvement, collaborative innovation, and organizational forms, I think that these virtual experiences, these mixed reality experiences, solve a bunch of these problems in ridiculous ways. And I'm going to give you an example. You look at yourself today, right? If you want to have, for example, I mean, Mr. Steven is on this call. I'm sitting in my house here in Lagos, Nigeria, and he's all the way in Madrid, I'm guessing, or Madrid or Barcelona, I'm not sure, but Spain. He's all the way in Spain, and imagine him and me being able to wear a headset, and suddenly we can see frames of ourselves as if we're in the same room and interact with each other. I feel like that's a very game-changing thing, and that's going to have a major impact on collaborative innovation. It's going to break all the walls for collaboration that existed, where people will tell you that you have to be in the same room, or you are required to come into the office or not, because it's like, oh, but we can do this thing together in the metaverse, right? Companies can create their own metaverses and go and collaborate there. You don't need people coming to the office space for any sort of thing. People can host, conferences or shows in the metaverse. And if if you can afford to go physically, that would be great. But for someone that maybe couldn't afford or wasn't healthy enough to make a trip, they can still do all of that, and it does not in any way affect anyone's collaboration. And obviously this would have a positive effect on businesses, which would also be a positive effect on the economy in the long run, if you think about it. Customer expectations, I'm going to give an example of, we see these things happen a lot, what I ordered versus what I got. But if you could actually project, if you're about to buy a dress, and how sometimes they'll tell you, it's not the vendor's fault. When you were buying the dress, you thought you were also going to buy it with the body of the model that was wearing the dress. Where if you could actually see a 3D representation of what that dress would look like on a 3D representation of you, it would help manage your expectations when that dress finally comes, because you kind of have an idea of what that would look like in the real world, as opposed to just buying something that you see as a picture, a flat picture, and then when you get it, you're a bit disappointed from what it looks like. Product improvement as well. I think that for this sort of things, it would see people trying to sort of like do more. I'm going to give an example. I know that today there are companies like IKEA, there are companies like Taylor that try to create a mixed reality experience in, their e-commerce, purchasing their products. So you see what the furniture is going to look like in your space before you go ahead and hit buy. For a bunch of people and obviously this helps them reiterate and improve on how they are thinking about creating these products, because they have to make sure that these products fit into the spaces of the people that sort of want to buy them. And as more people adopt technologies like this, we're going to see instances where people's products also improve over time, either because they are immersing it into actual, real spaces and seeing how they perform there, or they're doing some kind of simulations, some kind of simulating real world experiences with real people that just, are existing digitally at the moment, and seeing, how they also respond to that and stuff like that. So I think that this is going to be very useful in this world as we go forward. I'm going to, hand over to Stephen to say more and also talk about organizational forms maybe.
Sure. Adora, you made some great points. I think that when you use the example of the virtual process of trying on clothing, for instance, so you can assess what this looks like on you. Well, one of the you're very, very well versed on is a whole area of NFTs and non-fungible tokens, and how that's become a market uniquely in itself. And in fact, from a economic model, many companies, for instance, top fashion houses, whether that's Gucci or Balenciaga and so on, are actually offering the purchase of digital copies of their gowns, their dresses, and so on. And it's not necessarily for people just to try them on. It's actually, you buy these things, you actually purchase the digital image, which then you apply in an augmented way, much like you put the rabbit ears on and so on and so forth. And then that individual would publish those pictures, so to speak, those augmented pictures, onto Instagram and onto their social media platforms. They don't have to go out and spend $5,000 for a gown. What they do is capture the digital image, apply that to their avatar or themselves, and they get the satisfaction of showing the world, showing their social media community that they're attired in a particular way. I was very dismissive early on of non-fungible tokens. I really didn't get it. But then you see how many institutions are now entering, not only consumer product goods companies or artists or whatnot, but you now see the financial institutions, the major banks, establishing into the metaverse, digital, banking offices, and doing some really, quite interesting things. One of the concerns I have, and your point that you made about collaboration and headsets and experience the same environment, I think, yeah, it's really amazing technology. My concern, just from a humanity standpoint, is do we lose a bit of our humanity by moving so much more abruptly into the digital world? I look at the relationships between, like, my children and their friends, rather than talking on the phone. It's all digital, texting and emails and one-way communication, as I say it, as opposed to bilateral communication. So, big question with the move technology: do we lose some of our humanity and our social connectivity with fellow humans? And I'd be curious on Adora's view of that, because I'm sure it's almost a policy or a higher level thought process.
Yes, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I was having a conversation I think last week that also spoke to this, and I also mentioned that it's kind of, it's very great, it's innovative, it's fantastic even, but I mean, what is going to happen when everybody is plugged in? Are we going to be, is it going to eradicate the need to physically communicate with each other, or, is it going to become a matter of, if I wanted to speak to somebody who is in the same building with me, I'll need to turn on my headset and, plug into, mixed reality just to have a conversation. Adora, what are your thoughts on that?
I honestly don't see that happening because at the end of the day, human beings are social animals. We would always want to find ways to interact physically, and we would always do that regardless. But at the same time, I see these technologies getting misused if they are not contained. But at the end of the day, I don't think those are problems with the technology. They are more or less problems with the people, because the technology is supposed to be an enhancer to your life, not an alternative option for how you choose to live, if that makes sense. But at the end of the day, people would use it. I mean, we see when social media came as well, it was to connect people, and make it possible. I mean, we're able to have these conversations right now because of technology, and we're using it for good, using it to share, information and hopefully get people to be enlightened and drive conversation. But there's some people that use these platforms for bad as well. And to be honest, there's only so much you can contain. So while we acknowledge that the bad exists, let's try a way to contain it, but let's not throw away the entire technology as opposed to embracing the good as well.
So one example that is a recent example relates to the pandemic, and we look at many of the schools globally were shut down for a long period of time, and the retrospective research is that school children fell behind because they lost that interactivity with fellow students, because they were being schooled through technology means and webcast and the like, as opposed to being in the same room together. So I think there is a cause and effect when you reduce the human interaction with technology. It's just part of fundamental growth and social behaviors and so on. If in fact you rely on technology for all your communications, you may become better at it and it may be more efficient. But again, my concern, probably from a humanist standpoint, do we lose something in the mix?
Yeah, it's a very valid concern. I think we've already, I think Adora has given a very, very good perspective on that. At the end of the day, it's always, I mean, as technology continues to develop, there will always be, things that we'll need to curb as human beings. So, I mean, with the age of social media, a lot of things can keep us disconnected from physical and social interactions. It's up to it's up to us. So instead of throwing away the baby with the bathwater, we can find a balance in between. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your perspective on that. Okay, so let's move to Africa now. I'd love to hear both your thoughts on this. I think we'll start from Steve. From an inclusiveness perspective, we know that Africa has lagged behind in past industrial revolutions, especially on account of lack of education, poverty, and dearth of infrastructure. Is there room for this new wave of digital revolution to scale up and catch on with the rest of the world? And what are the essential ingredients for successful digital revolution? And where would you say that Africa needs to improve on that?
It's interesting because my background is in banking and a lot of financial technology. And in a lot of respects, yes, there is much catch up in Africa to do. Certainly it's got to inspire more innovation. Something to be said about the collaboration between government, the private sector, and the academic world is important to create entrepreneurial opportunities, to create new industries. I think that's keenly important. I was going to say that from a fintech standpoint, the banking system isn't as broad-based in Africa as it is in some of the Western countries. Yet, Africa established, through their telecommunications companies, the ability to use their digital devices, because most people have digital, mobile phones, to create a banking system without using banks. They basically use the telecom and the mobile service providers to top up their phones, put balances, cash balances, and transfer it between each other. It's a great innovation where the continent didn't have the support. So by necessity, Africa did innovate and created a fairly extensive system. But it will take time. And in a lot of respects, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and is it really a leap ahead from the third, or is it such as an evolution, or is it really a reimagination of what we have? And I'd probably defer, or I would defer to it's an incremental innovation. Certainly there's technologies, but fundamentally you really have to establish economic systems within societies. And rather than, I believe, governing and trying to do it from the public sector and downward through governmental intervention, I think doing things that stimulate private sector activity is very important. The Chinese are very active investors in Africa. Africa overall has tremendous natural resources, which haven't been taken advantage of as of yet. But now industry is moving in. You still have significant technology transfers. So I wrote a piece for the university on what the world looks like in 2030, 2035. And I do believe it's going to be a period of China, India, and Africa as the leaders because of the population, because of the demography, because of the natural resources, and technology transfers actually enable things to happen quicker. It doesn't take generations to move from one venue to the next. It moves a lot quicker. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic that Africa will have, but it's got to be done through a collaboration of the public sector, the private sector, and the academic community.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. Adara, can we hear your thoughts on that?
Personally, there's a lot of stuff that Stephen has said. Me, I don't like having all these, what does Africa need to do differently conversations, because I know that the first place to start from in all of this is funding. We can't be talking about, building for the metaverse and tapping into a revolution when many people don't even have the means in the first place. Obviously, we've been seeing that in the past couple years, internet penetration has been increasing and things have been getting better. But I'm not even talking about those. I'm talking about more infrastructural challenges. I'm talking about us locally building these businesses and these metaverse companies here. I mean, I'm seeing some metaverse companies springing up from here, them raising money and beginning to do interesting things. And I appreciate that. And I would like to see more, not just even only from the software point of view, but also from the hardware. Let's try and see what would it take to get hardware or headsets manufacturers in this space from this part of the world. Because at the end of the day, these things are going to be beneficial to us. So I think that's like the only thing that I feel like I want to add to that. It's more an open question for people to think about.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so this question is for you, Adora. It has been argued that, big tech has a monopoly over fourth industrial revolution technologies. I mean, personally, from my own experience, when I am researching or when I'm reading or seeing news about the fourth industrial revolution, it's usually big tech companies I see, at the forefront of this. Do you agree with this assessment? And are SMEs thriving in this space? Or are we looking at a possible reality where only big tech companies will be solely responsible for delivering on the possibilities that the fourth industrial revolution will bring?
I don't think it's only big tech. Like I said, like the last answer that I gave, I've seen, obviously, let's be very honest that big tech companies are more equipped to, and they have more capacity to, tap into this on a larger scale, because I mean they're bigger companies, they have more employees, they have more money, they have like a bunch of resources, financial and people resources, that can help them, tap into this space a lot better. But I mean, I don't want to call them SMBs, but like other businesses, other startups that are just coming up are still going to tap into this in some capacity, might not be on the same scale. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be because the way the companies operate aren't even balanced if you think about it in the first place. But I feel like from this whole um advanced technology, cutting edge technology, avant-garde and industrial revolution cake, there are many slices and everybody that is interested can have a slice.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. Um, so we're going to um enter the part of the conversation that has to do with, regulation. So, Mr. Steven, the growth of technologies such as blockchain, IoT, 3D printing, cloud computing, robotics are being impacted in Africa by, I think Adora also mentioned it, lack of electricity, low internet penetration, um, um, and other bottlenecks. How can Africa close this gap? Is there a business case for global investors to finance the needed tech infrastructure, to provide access to Africa's underserved technology market?
I think there are opportunities, like, as I mentioned, Africa developed a banking system without banks for peer-to-peer transfers. Stepping back to Adora's comment on big tech, because I think it plays into this, is it's interesting, big tech and some of the major platforms, let's say Google or Facebook or even Twitter, have user bases that are larger than the largest countries in the world, such as China. I believe Facebook has 2.2 billion users, where China has 1.2 billion people. So big tech not only has a dominance, but with that, I believe that they have a responsibility to expand their reach into areas like Africa, to enable everybody. It should be, I'm sure it is, part of their growth plan. So I think there's a responsibility of big tech to further its engagement with those that are lacking the technology resources. I think when you talk about power to power broadband and whatnot, there's newer technologies that go beyond mere wires and cables. You've got Tesla or Elon and his Skylink, and you have other ways to enhance your digital communications. So I think technology not necessarily focused on Africa, but it's really globally. And I think Africa will benefit from that sort of, rising of, all the tide to address the, the needs, the technology needs of others. But there's a need, for, all the things, the growth of technologies such as, as you say, blockchain and IoT. I think there's going to be new industries that are developed as part of the, the next 10 to 15 years, driven by things like climate and environmentally sensitive things. We're working on a project which focuses on industrial hemp. Hemp being a plant, and that and other types of plant substances like fungi, mushrooms, mycelium are being used for as a substitute for animal-based substances like leather to improve the environment. And so, they're sort of substituting old materials with new materials, but those new materials are really existing materials just applied in a separate way. So technology is enabling sort of the reuse, the reframing of, some basic materials to displace things that may not be good for the environment. But in that process, you're creating new industries. And so I think Africa has the opportunity to look at what their natural resources are and rethink industry. And that's really a combination of, as I said before, the government, the industrial sector, as well as I think academics play a big role because of the research they can conduct and think of next generation technologies, next generation materials, how you can mimic. Biomimicry is a big thing in terms of, I want something to work like, leather, or, think about alternative meats. Instead of using meat for hamburger, you can use plant-based materials like, for the Impossible Burger. So there's a lot of things that I believe, the continent has as inherent resources. And then it's really a function of, let's create an industrial model around that and then build from within.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Steve. Okay, my next question is for Adora. We've discussed from our discussion, we've talked about how the fourth industrial revolution will lead to the fusion of our physical, biological, and digital identities. And like we've seen with every single form of digital transformation, there must be conversations around ethics and possible regulatory interventions. There must be conversations around, potential identity theft, cybersecurity, data privacy, and whatnot. So how do you think that the potential risks that come with the use of these emerging technologies can be sustainably addressed?
I think the first things are advocacy and awareness. Everyone needs to know, whether from the organizational standpoint and from the personal standpoint. From the organizational standpoint, it is, and I say this a lot, and this is why cybersecurity is one of the most important things that people should invest in. As you are investing and you are building and you are getting money, if your systems are not secure and stable, all those things you are piling up can disappear in a split second. I know how many people have, lost, some tokens. I know how many people got, let me use this word, robbed of their NFTs and things like that in, blockchain technology. And obviously, when people talk about the metaverse, they talk about blockchain, is why I'm using that as an example. So it's important to understand that security is a big deal. One thing organizations can do is train their employees, always train their employees on security, compliance, and secure ways that they can interact with technology. Sometimes, once in a while, just send a random phishing email to the entire office and see who mistakenly clicks on those links, and set up training times to teach those people while why, what they did is wrong and stuff like that. These things are important to do because at the end of the day, I heard that recently Cisco got hacked. I don't know that it was Cisco. Yeah, I think it was Cisco. And it was through an employee. So employees at the end of the day are always the weak links. So you want to address that early enough. Apart from, in the context of an organization, even personally, and this is where the platforms that people use are important. The platforms to educate their customers on, how to use these things in a secure way. I feel like as we have, agencies and as there are ads and we have influencers marketing things, we should also have people that are advocating for internet security, talking about these things a lot to help people learn. I think is mostly education, whether it comes as, advocacy or awareness or whatever. I think that's the best way to curb it, in my opinion, because these things would come. Right. So prevention is better than cure.
Thank you so much. I really like that because I also think that there also needs to be education like on a personal level. I think a lot of times, a lot of people use technologies without having like a full grasp of the implications of that use. What kind of data will be collected, the possible consequences or the risks involved, if you are entering your password in public, what are the risks involved? If you are putting a lot of pictures of yourself out there, what are the risks involved? I feel like people need to also educate themselves on a personal level about the risk, possible risks and attached to using these technologies as well. So, Mr. Stephen and Adora, throughout this conversation, we've had, instances where we've spoken about private and public engagement. And we've talked about, the government engaging stakeholders, just having a proper synergy. So before we let you go, my final question, many have argued that an articulated regulatory approach to the fourth industrial revolution through aligned policies and shared structures across the region is Africa's greatest chance at achieving global relevance. And this seems largely achievable under the recently signed African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How do you think that the current economic synergies throughout the Africa implementation will accelerate Africa's digital revolution? And do you think that the implementation of the African Free Trade Agreement would actually, help?
Yeah, the ACFTA is a pan-African agreement to really sort of stimulate the continental trade, which is great. It's obviously an economic policy. One part of that was the establishment of a payment and settlement system that would facilitate, currency transactions between countries and make it a lot smoother. I actually think one opportunity there is within Africa is to take that a little further. If you look at what's happening in many countries and many continents, the move towards a digital currency seems to be high on everybody's list, whether that's in China and India, so on and so forth. The United States is a bit further behind. Would Africa benefit not only by having the ability to transfer currencies between countries, but if there was a singular currency and probably a digital currency that created value, but take it one step further, but to create a loyalty program. That's where, I've chatted, quite a bit about cryptocurrencies, and while the technology is quite interesting, most of the large cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ether and so on and so forth, the volatility and value prevent them from being really used for transactional purposes, commercial purposes. The stablecoin and certain, a stablecoin protocol seems to work a bit better, but that's got to be, the technology still, and the use cases have to be refined. But I do think going forward, having indigenous digital currencies to support the loyalty within your local economy is where the economic model, the national economic models, will go in time. And that's going to really stimulate, intercontinental traffic and intra-continental traffic, economic traffic. And so I think that the trade agreement is a great first step, but I think you need the payment rails that induce people to use such will be a huge step forward and enable more activity to take place than less.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Madara, can we hear your thoughts on that?
I mean, I honestly don't know. I guess it's to wait and see how this evolves and what this would mean for the continent. However, I am hopeful seeing people build and keep building out things here. I guess hopefully the government and other regulators would make life easy for the innovators, but at the moment I can't really. I mean, we've seen how a bunch of things have gone in the past, and things are very volatile, and anything can change at any time. So I can't, for the life of me, in all honesty, sit here and say, oh yes, this would mean great things for Africa, and this would put Africa on, the global map for technology stuff and all of that. I don't know, if I can't say that, if I'm being very honest, but I guess everyone has to put it to work, and we just wait and see what happens.
Thank you so much. Definitely, everyone has to put in the work. It has great potential. A single African market has such great potential. We're just waiting on the implementation, and if we can get that implementation right, I very much believe that it's gonna shift Africa's position in the global market very much. Thank you so much, Adora and Stephen. This has been a very insightful session. Thank you so much for making out the time to join us today. And to you out there, thank you for being a fabulous audience. Remember, the conversation continues on our social media handles. Do remember to send us your comments and thoughts on today's episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Simply by Deal HQ Partners. Deal HQ Partners is an African-focused transaction advisory law firm operating out of Lagos, Nigeria. To know more about our services, please visit our website, www.dealhqpartners.com, or follow us on social media, Twitter at DealHQLaw, Instagram at DealHQLaw, Facebook at DealHQLaw, LinkedIn at DealHQ Partners. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Deal HQ Partners. To find out more about our services, visit www.dealhqpartners.com. See you on the next episode.